Okay folks, this is Dragon on the topic of vehicle mounted UHF CB radios. The vehicle I'm in at the moment is my Nissan Dual Cab 2006 model, and even then they had computerized electronic management systems in the vehicles. Now the radio in front of you is my UHF CB radio, programmed to the UHF CB. This particular radio requires computer programming with software. It's one of the first ones I bought, going back about 10 years ago or so. Now, the problem with most modern vehicles, even going back to those times, is if you have a look, you've got the dash, the center console, and all this stuff down here. Alright, so as you can see, mounting a radio, CB radio in dash is going to be quite a problem in some of these vehicles. When we bought this vehicle shortly before Christmas 2012, it already had this GPS system fitted in here inside the vehicle. In other models, other cars of the same vehicle, same model, I have seen UHF CB radios mounted in there. Now, it becomes a problem, as I said, with the more modern vehicles, because they cram everything into this dash. And to try and fit a two-way radio in there like UHF CB, it can create quite a few problems. Either they have to take something out, like the AM, FM radio, commercial radio, or try and fit it in there somewhere. From this example, because it's got the this GPS all singing, all dancing, coffee making machine in here, I can't fit a radio in there. So what I did was mount that one on top of the dash on the driver's side, just using industrial strength double-sided tape, just stuck to the top there. Now people say, well, why did you do that? Why didn't you screw it down? Well, if you have a look, most of the vehicles these days, and even back then, you got this type of stuff here, right? Behind that is very dense foam, usually. And to actually screw the mounting brackets onto that is next to useless, because they'll eventually pull out, particularly if you're traveling over rough roads, cross country and that sort of thing. This radio here, it's a heavy duty radio in that it's got an aluminium chassis, great heat dissipation. Yes, I've had to put a cowling over the top of it to keep direct sunlight off it, particularly during the summer months, so the radio doesn't overheat. But as I mentioned in a post on this topic, you've got LCD screen here, and it's the same with handheld radios as well. If they have too much exposure to sunlight, it can ruin the LCD displays. Also overnight, when you're driving, this is lit up with all your information on there, channel information and so on. And what I did was just made a cardboard cowling to go to the top, as I said, to keep the direct sunlight off the radio, help it prevent from overheating. And secondly, I bought a forwarder bit over here so I don't get any light reflection up here on the windscreen with night driving, which is a big distraction. Now, the other thing to consider too is where to mount the radios. Now, in Australia, the UHF CB radio is the most common type of two-way radio communications for most people, with the exception of perhaps transport companies and other commercial companies that either have their own licensed frequency, or they use VHF licensed again. So I mounted it in this position because it's in my sight line when I drive. So if I have to make any adjustments on the radio, it's not a distraction for me to try and change any of the settings on the radio if it was located in this area or down here somewhere. And a good example of that is with this GPS system here. I can't use it while I'm driving because it's too much of a distraction for me to look away from my sight line when I'm driving to come over here and change any of the settings on this. So that's something else to consider, where the radio is going to be sighted, whether it's going to be too far away from the sight line of the driver, where it's a distraction, and also with some radios, as I mentioned in the post on this particular topic, they have the audio speaker mounted under the radio there. Alright, this one has a front mounted speaker, so that any road noise that's in the vehicle, the more modern vehicles, the road noise is quite good in that you don't get much road noise at all. But you open a passenger window or any of the windows in the vehicle, and you're going to get a lot of road noise, both with the wind going past the window and a lot of outside noise from traffic and so on. So that's why I mentioned a front mounted speaker. There are smaller types of CB radios, UHF CB radios on the market now that are more suited for the later model vehicles. But again, you're going to have to check with the owner's manual as to whether CB radios, the UHF, can be used inside these vehicles. Now for these ones here, generally speaking, and I did check with this particular model of vehicle, it's quite safe to use as far as any risk of damage or interference with the vehicle electronics, engine management systems and so on, because the antenna is mounted outside. However, in some vehicles, and I know one model was a Nissan Pulsar, somewhere around the 90s model. In the owner's manual, it said you cannot use handheld or walkie-talkie UHF radios inside the cabin. It interferes with the vehicle electronics. So if you've got a vehicle with electronic systems in it, engine management systems and so on, check the owner's manual, talk to the dealer if it's a new vehicle, or talk to experts that fit two-way radios into vehicles, particularly more modern ones, as to where it can go, cable runs and antenna locations and all the rest of it. Also, another thing you consider too is where the microphone is located. That's where it's located on mine. It's quite easy for me to reach. You've got the microphone hanger here, and in some vehicles you don't have a lot of space to put that in there, and I don't like them sitting up on the dash like some people do, because they rock around, fall around, and next thing you got this dangling down around your feet, particularly as a driver, which you don't want. Another thing you can consider is the microphone cable. Now, the way I installed it was, it comes down the side of the instrument panel here, so it's not in the way of my instruments. And also, many radios now use what they call an RJ45 connector, quite often used in copper networks for computers. And they're not a very strong connector in that they won't take a lot of stress pulling down on it when you pick the microphone up. So what I've done here on this one, this has got a rubber boot over it to protect it from the sunlight, is to stress relief it. Just zip tie it off to the cradle, the mounting cradle on the radio there, so that when I pick the microphone up, the stress is on this point here, not on the actual connector itself. Okay, let's have a look at a few other things. Back in a sec. Okay, antennas. What I've done on mine is, because I live on the top of a mountain, a very hilly area, I mounted my antennas on the top of the vehicle on these so-called cargo bars, which don't take a lot of weight, but I had these fitted here so I can mount the antennas on the top of the vehicle. Now, some people ask, why would you do that? Well, for one, because I live in a hilly area, UHF is theoretically based, line of sight. But the extra height gives me just a little bit more range than where they are most commonly mounted on a lot of vehicles. It doesn't matter whether they're four-wheel drives or just normal sedans. Some of them are mounted in here with a type of a Z bracket, similar to the ones I've used on my roof, or if it's fitted with a bull bar or something like that, they usually mount them down here, which means the antenna is actually lower and can restrict the range of your UHF radio. If we have a look in the back of the radio, as I mentioned before in the post, sometimes with in-dash mountings, see if I can focus this, you've got your antenna cable connector there. Alright, if they're in an in-dash mounting, you can't check from time to time whether these come loose, and they do come loose with vehicle vibration and things like that. If they come loose, it's going to affect how your radio operates, the efficiency of it, send in and receive. The power cord, that's it there. There's a fuse link there somewhere, and what I've done is scratch it off there, is, if you can see it there, I've used a common plug, DC plug, so that I can swap these radios in and out of vehicles or with my base station using the same sort of connector. It's much easier that way. It's just a matter of taking the antenna off, taking it out of the bracket, unplug that plug, and I can plug it into my base station or another vehicle using the same plug. Okay. And fuses, you need to have access to a fuse link. Now, for in-dash mountings, this can be rather hard, particularly if it's stuffed into the back of the dash somewhere. And it was a problem with the GPS system in this vehicle. When we were looking at it, they actually had part of the dash apart because the GPS unit had blown the fuse, and the fuse was somewhere inside the dash. Now, some of these radios, even when they're switched off, as this one is here at the moment, it's switched off, they do sometimes have a slight drain on your battery, on your car battery, which can cause problems over long term, particularly if you haven't not using your vehicle for a while. It can flatten your battery or reduce the charge on the battery to the point where it's very hard to turn the vehicle over. So what I've done is, we have a look down here, there it is there, I put an isolation switch in. These radios are not wired through the ignition key system in accessories or when the engine is on. What I've done is actually wired them straight to the battery of the vehicle with a fuse link. And to isolate the radios when they're not in use is this switch here. So apart from the radio being turned off, this also isolates the power, DC power feed to the battery, so they're not slowly draining the battery even when the radio is switched off. Alright, the cable feed for the antenna, depending where it's located. Now, it gave me a bit of grief on this vehicle, and indeed it can be a problem on some other vehicles too. Hang on, I'll just fake it there. Alright, what I found was, best way to get the antenna feed cable, this is RG58, and it's got to be good quality RG58, there's some crap stuff out there, was to feed it along the door seal, the rubber door seal. Now, the much older vehicles, like the Troopy behind me, had a gutter system on it where I've got clamps mounted on the gutter system, and I mounted my antennas high there for the same reasons. On the newer vehicles, they don't have a gutter system. They have this type of system here where the doors overlap and seal on rubber seals. So if you're looking at mounting antennas on top of the vehicle, then getting it to the inside of the cabin, to the back of the radio, can be a problem. You don't want to have to be drilling holes in this area here and so on, because it causes all sorts of problems with sealing it from water and all that sort of stuff. So I had a look at the door seal, and I found that I could run the cable through the door seal under the rubber flap there, right down here, and bring it in this point here, down the rubber door seal, up and over the dash. The DC feed from the battery is here. I'll show you that in a sec how I got that into the cabin. As I mentioned, with DC cables, if you connect it straight to your battery, and particularly your antenna feed cable, somewhere it's going to have to go through a firewall in the vehicle to get to the antenna if it's mounted low. And I'll show you on another vehicle how I did it. The most important thing is with running these cables, particularly the antenna feed cable, the RG58, is to keep the cable runs to a minimum. You work on 70 centimetre lengths, which is roughly the wavelength of the Australian UHF CB, give or take, and that reduces, helps out with your SWR. The SWR meters for UHF CB radios are very expensive. So if you get it professionally done, hopefully, if they know their job and they're got a good reputation, they'll also check the SWR on it. Another thing you want to check too is that when they're installed, whether you do it yourself or get a professional done, is that this cable here is not kinked. Okay, and what I mean kinked is kinked at right angles and things like that. That changes the characteristic of the cable and can cause degradation of transmit receive, and probably stand up the SWR, standing wave ratio, which is basically what they call, without getting into the technical side of it, it's reflected power back to your radio, and it can cause some severe damage to your radio if the SWR is very high. Alright, that's on this vehicle. Now, this is a 2006 model. So for other vehicles, please check the owner's manual as to whether you can mount radios inside, the use of handhelds inside, in respect to what it can do or what it could possibly do damage to the vehicle electronic systems. And another thing I mentioned in the post was these keys are missing. I've walked off into the bush and I've got them in my pocket, or they've been lost and somebody else wants to use that radio. If they're wired through the ignition, you can't use the radio. That's why I've wired it separate to the battery. So no matter whether the key's there or not, somebody needs to use that radio, they can turn it on. And of course the isolation switch I showed you before stops the any small drain on the battery that some radios do have. Alright, back in a sec. This is my other vehicle, a Troopy. This is another type of UHF CB radio. This one is manually programmable. Again, it's a ruggedized radio, aluminium chassis. And if you can just see under there, the heat sinks. Aluminium doesn't hold heat very well, it dissipates very quickly. Again, cowling over the top to protect it from the sun, stop it from overheating, and also to prevent any reflection from the LCD panel of a night when you're driving. Again, this is an 86 model Troopy, and you can see from the dash area here, it's very hard to fit any radios in there. Possibly by taking out the AM FM radio, you may be able to get one in there, depending on the size and dimensions of it, and maybe just tray here. But again, it brings up the question of access to the antenna connector and the fuse. So what I've done on this, and it's a lot easier because the dash itself, the top of it is fairly flat compared to the Nissan dual cab, is mounted it with industrial strength double-sided tape, 3M tape, and those radios don't move. I've had these, well, this one is sitting in here for a couple of years, and she's been over some pretty rugged country, a lot of vibration and so on, and these have stayed in place, they haven't fallen off. What I also do is carry spare fuses, two there for the radios. This one takes a spade type, this one also takes the glass type. You just see in the back there, it's a spade type fuse holder, and that's the round glass type, but they're accessible to me. If I blow a fuse, then I can just reach in the back there and change the fuse, but then you've got to wonder why it blows the fuse, so that's another story. Again, this one has a front mounted speaker, 86 Troopy. The road noise gets pretty bad in here sometimes, so if you're mounting them in dash, as I said, one of the problems is a lot of the radios have the speakers mounted under this area of the radio. It's mounted in dash, it's inside the dash, and it can be very hard to see. The backs of these radios do have what they call speaker extensions, where you can put an extension speaker on it, much like this one. It's an 8 ohm speaker, specifically designed for radios, because the radio beside it has the speaker mounted underneath, and even mounted on the dash here with the road noise, particularly if I open up a window, it's very hard to hear. So that's something else to consider. Alrighty. Alright folks, this is the we're on the topic of vehicle communications. This is my 11 meter long range radio, with the antenna mounted on the bull bar of the Troopy. In some vehicles, particularly the 4x4s, you can get what they call inside systems like this, where gear can be mounted. That's another option you may be able to do or look at in some types of vehicles, whether the sedans or 4x4s or SUVs or whatever you want to call them, something like that. So that's another option to look at. If you mount your radio gear up there, it can be a problem with line of sight from driving, because you've got to look around at the radio if you need to make any adjustments to it. So that's just an example. It's not UHF, this one's the 11 meter band, but the idea is that some vehicles you can have a mounting system, I forget what they call them now anyway, but you can put up on the inside of the vehicle. Alright folks, that wraps it up. So I hope that was helpful. By all means, ask any questions. It varies from vehicle to vehicle. Please check your vehicle's owner's manual. Specifications reference the use of two-way radios, in particular with how it may interfere or damage your vehicle electronic systems. So if you're not sure on how to install them, I suggest it's going to cost you a little bit extra, but get an expert to install it so it doesn't give you any heartache or extra expensive damaging the factory built vehicle electronic systems. They can be quite sensitive. Alright, thanks for watching.